Give me the fat girl as payment. Loan shark's demand. Mountain man's unexpected offer. Give me the fat girl as payment. Victor Thornton didn't raise his voice when he said it. He didn't need to. His words cut through the summer heat of Copper Ridge like a whip, loud enough for every man, woman, and child clustered in front of the Henderson ranch house to hear. Violet Henderson heard them too. She stood just inside the doorway, hands clenched in the fabric of her faded Sunday dress, her heart pounding so hard she thought the crowd must see it. 25 years old, nearly 190 kilograms, she had spent a lifetime pretending not to hear the whispers about her size. Today, there was no pretending. Today, her body was part of a bargain. George Henderson, gray and stooped, though he was only 53, faced Thornton on the porch. Dust clung to his boots, sweat darkened his collar, but what shamed him most was the piece of paper shaken in his hands. "Victor," he rasped, "take the land, take the house, take the damn cattle, but not my daughter." "Please?" Thornton smiled, a thin reptilian curl of his lips. He stood out in his expensive dark suit, polished boots, and gold watch chain, like a banker dropped into a cattle town. 2 armed men flanked him, expressionless, hands resting on their gun belts. "A deal is a deal, Mr. Henderson," he said smoothly. 3 years ago, you begged me to save this ranch from foreclosure. $2,000, 25% interest. You signed this contract of your own free will with witnesses present, and here, he tapped the paper with one manicured finger, you pledged your daughter as collateral. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone snickered. Someone else muttered, "Lord have mercy." Eyes shifted toward the doorway where Violet stood half hidden in shadow, cheeks burning, body suddenly heavier than ever. "She was plump when we made the bargain," Thornton went on, letting his gaze slide over her. "Now she's substantial. But a contract is a contract. You cannot pay. So I take the land and I take the girl." Violet swallowed hard. The humiliation was worse than the fear. Men she had grown up around stared openly at her belly, her arms, her double chin, as if her shame were a spectacle laid out for their entertainment. Women whispered behind gloved hands. No one stepped forward. No one spoke up. "Papa," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I'll go. I won't let you go to prison." At that, Thornton's smile widened. "How dutiful, how touching, and useful. Because I have plans for you, Miss Henderson. You're going to help me get my hands on the McAllister Ranch, whether you like it or not." Violet's breath hitched. Prison. Fraud. The words had fallen like stones from Thornton's tongue a few minutes earlier, when he calmly explained how he could ruin her father completely if she refused him. It wasn't just her future on the line. It was George's life. The church bell in town began to strike 10, each toll echoing across the dry valley. The sound seemed to mark the end of everything Violet had ever known. "Time is short," Thornton said. "I'll be back at noon to hear your answer. Either she agrees to the marriage I arrange, or your father goes to territorial prison. Choose wisely." He turned to leave, satisfied he had won. The crowd parted for him like water, and that was when a new voice spoke from the edge of the yard, deep, calm, carrying easily over the low murmur of the onlookers. "Seems to me," the stranger said, "you're forgetting one thing, Mr. Thornton." Heads turned. A tall man sat astride a bay horse near the fence line, broad shoulders outlined against the white glare of the sky. He wore buckskin trousers, a trail-worn shirt, and a battered hat, pulled low over dark hair tied back at his neck. dust coated his boots and the hem of his coat. A long rifle rested easily in the saddle scabbard. He nudged his horse forward, eyes fixed not on Thornton, but on Violet, still frozen in the doorway. "You forgot to ask," he said quietly. "What happens if the girl marries someone else first?" The crowd went silent. Daniel Frost didn't dismount right away. He sat tall in the saddle, letting the silence stretch across the yard like a taut rope. Violet felt every gaze swing from Thornton to the stranger, this mountain man who had walked into her nightmare as if he belonged there. Thornton squinted at him, clearly irritated at being interrupted. "Who the hell are you?" "Daniel Frost," the stranger replied, tipping his hat with a calmness that felt out of place amid the tension. "Trapper, scout, and a man who doesn't care for seeing a woman bullied in front of half the territory." A few people shuffled uncomfortably. Thornton's thugs stiffened, hands hovering near their holsters. But Daniel didn't flinch. His dark eyes remained steady, thoughtful, taking in the scene. The trembling father, the humiliated daughter, the townspeople pretending not to enjoy the spectacle. Violet felt her pulse hammer harder. No man had ever looked at her that way before, not with pity, not with disgust, but with a quiet, measured awareness, as if she were a person whose feelings mattered. Thornton recovered his composure with a thin smile. "This is a private matter." "Doesn't look private," Daniel replied. "Looks like you dragged half the town out here to watch you corner a family you already broke." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the crowd. Thornton's jaw tightened. Violet stepped outside then, unable to bear hiding in the doorway any longer. The sun hit her like a fist, hot, unforgiving. She knew what she looked like out here in the open, a big woman, cheeks flushed, dress pulling at the seams, hands twisting in her skirt. She braced herself for the snickers, the whispers. But Daniel didn't smirk. He didn't look away either. He simply nodded at her, respectful, steady. George Henderson placed a shaking hand on his daughter's arm. "Violet, go back inside." "No," Violet said softly but firmly. "This concerns me. I'll stay." Thornton stepped closer, his polished boots crunching on the dry earth. "Let me make something clear to both of you," he said, addressing Daniel without glancing at Violet again. "Miss Henderson is bound by contract. She owes me a marriage. Her father signed the papers. There is no room for interference." "And what kind of marriage were you planning for her?" Daniel asked, voice low. "A real one? Or one that serves whatever scheme you cooked up?" Murmurs in the crowd. Even those afraid of Thornton wanted the answer. Thornton chuckled. "My plans are none of your concern." "They are mine," Violet said suddenly. Thornton turned, annoyed. "My dear, this is business. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Violet said louder this time. Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "You want to use me to steal the McAllister ranch. You want to trade me like livestock to some man I've never met. You want to force my father into prison if I say no." The crowd shifted uneasily again. A few women gasped. Men exchanged looks. Saying these things out loud gave them weight and danger. Thornton's smile vanished. "You're hysterical." "Seems clear-headed to me," Daniel said. Thornton snapped, "Stay out of this." Daniel's horse stamped its hoof once, agitated by his rising anger. Daniel kept a hand on its mane, but his gaze never left Thornton. "Let me ask the lady something," Daniel said. Violet blinked. "Ask me?" "You the kind that scares easy?" Daniel asked quietly. Or are you the kind that's been scared so long you learned how to keep standing anyway? No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever asked her something so simple, so devastatingly sincere. Violet swallowed hard. I've been scared most of my life, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. But I'm still here. Daniel nodded once, as if that answer told him everything he needed to know. Thornton huffed. Enough. The contract is binding. If she isn't married to the man I choose by noon, her father goes to prison. That's the end of it. Unless she marries someone before then, Daniel repeated, voice calm despite Thornton's growing rage. A marriage is a marriage. You said so yourself. That's not, Thornton sputtered. That's not what the contract means. Daniel smiled. It wasn't friendly. Then maybe we should all take a look. George pulled the folded paper from his shirt pocket. His hands trembled, but he managed to open it. Daniel leaned down from his horse, scanning the lines quickly. There, Daniel said, tapping a sentence. It says, she must enter into a suitable marriage within 30 days of default. It doesn't say the groom must be chosen by you. Thornton lunged forward. Give me that! Daniel was off the horse before anyone saw him move. One moment he was in the saddle. The next, his boots hit the ground with a thud, towering over Thornton by a full head. The two hired thugs tensed, but Daniel simply folded the document and handed it back to George. I think the lady has more choices than you're letting on, he said. Thornton glared at Violet then, fury twisting his features. Don't get clever, girl. Violet's stomach turned, but she lifted her chin. She had been humiliated enough for one morning. She refused to cower again. I'm not clever, she said, meeting Thornton's eyes. I'm desperate and tired of being treated like property. Daniel stepped slightly in front of her, not blocking her, but shielding her from Thornton's stare in a quiet, instinctive gesture. Miss Henderson, he said, his voice gentler now, you don't know me, and I don't pretend to know your whole story. But if you want a way out of this, I can give you one. Violet froze. The crowd leaned in. Thornton looked like a man about to choke. Daniel continued, if the only thing keeping you trapped is needing a husband, well, I'm right here. Violet gasped. Marry me, Daniel said simply, right now, before noon, and Thornton loses every bit of leverage he thinks he has. The world went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Violet felt as if the earth had shifted under her feet. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? Daniel met her eyes, steady and unwavering. Because no woman deserves to be handed over like debt, he said. Because I've seen plenty of men like him, and I'm done watching them win. And because you deserve a choice, even if your choices are hard ones. Violet stared at him, breath caught in her chest. She didn't know this man. She didn't understand him. But for the first time in her life, someone was offering her a hand instead of a judgment. The decision was made in less than an hour. There had been no time to think, barely time to breathe. One moment, Violet Henderson stood on her father's porch, facing ruin. The next, she was standing inside Copper Ridge's small whitewashed church, her trembling hand in Daniel Frost's calloused one as Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife. The world blurred after that, blessings mumbled, hands shaken, stares of shock and gossip. Thornton's fury had followed them like a thundercloud, but he couldn't stop the ceremony, couldn't undo it. The contract had been fulfilled. Violet was no longer collateral. She was a married woman. Now, hours later, Violet rode beside Daniel as they left Copper Ridge behind, her father's figure growing smaller in the distance. The weight of the morning pressed against her chest until she felt she might crack from it. Marriage to a stranger, to a man she'd known barely 2 hours before promising him her life. Daniel rode slightly ahead, guiding the horses onto a narrow trail leading north toward the foothills. He wasn't a talker. She had learned that quickly. He rode like a man who had spent half his life in the saddle, straight-backed, steady-handed, eyes always scanning the land. By late afternoon, the sun hung low behind them, casting long shadows across the dry Nevada soil. The town was far out of sight now. The world had shifted from dusty streets and whispering neighbors to open fields dotted with sagebrush and cottonwoods swaying in the wind. "You doing all right back there?" Daniel asked finally, glancing over his shoulder. Yeah, I think so," Violet said. Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. He slowed his horse until they rode side by side. "Say the word if you need a rest. We'll camp before dark." Violet nodded, though exhaustion pressed into her bones. Adrenaline had kept her upright through the wedding, the farewells, and the initial ride. Now her muscles trembled, her back ached, and her heart felt bruised from beating too hard. "Tell me if the saddle bothers you," Daniel said after a moment. "I can adjust it." "I'm fine," she insisted, embarrassed. "You don't need to worry about me." "I married you," he replied, as if that explained everything. "Worrying comes with the bargain." The simplicity of his tone startled her. No mockery, no pity, just matter-of-fact responsibility. They rode for another hour as the trail narrowed, winding into the foothills. The land grew steeper, the air cooler. Pines replaced sagebrush. The sky overhead deepened into a soft pink as dusk crept closer. Violet shivered once. The mountain air cut sharper than the heat of Copper Ridge. Without a word, Daniel dismounted, pulled a rolled blanket from his pack, and handed it to her. "You'll need this," he said. "You'll be cold," she protested. "I've got a coat." He swung back into the saddle. "Put it around your shoulders." She obeyed. The wool was thick, warm, smelling faintly of wood smoke and pine sap. The scent of him? They stopped near a small clearing beside a creek just before sunset, where tall firs cast long shadows across the water. Daniel swung off his horse, his movements practiced, efficient. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. "There's fresh water, enough dry ground for a fire." Violet dismounted clumsily. Daniel was at her side instantly, steadying her with a firm hand at her elbow. He didn't comment on her difficulty getting down from the horse. He simply helped her, then turned to tend the animals. She watched as he built a fire. No wasted movements, no fumbling. He gathered fallen branches, split kindling with a small hatchet, and coaxed the flames until they flickered bright and steady. He cooked a simple meal: beans, a bit of salted pork, and hardtack softened in broth. Nothing fancy, but it smelled like heaven after the chaos of the day. He handed her a tin bowl. "Eat." "Thank you," she murmured. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, flames dancing between them. Violet kept her eyes on the creek, the flowing water catching the last light of day. "You're quiet," Daniel observed after a while. "So are you," she said. He gave a slight nod. "Fair enough." The silence stretched, comfortable, surprisingly. Violet finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the moment he offered marriage. "Why did you help me?" "Truly." Daniel set his bowl aside. The firelight cast warm shadows across his face, softening the angles, making him seem almost younger. "I've seen good people crushed by men like Thornton," he said. "Seen families torn apart because they had no one to stand between them and a predator. Your father, he looked like a man drowning. And you," he hesitated, "you looked like someone who'd been pushed into a corner too many times." Heat pricked behind Violet's eyes. She bowed her head, blinking fast. "And besides," Daniel added, voice gentler now, "a marriage of convenience isn't the worst fate. Two people can build a good life together even without romance at the start." "At the start?" Violet echoed. Daniel shrugged one broad shoulder. "Stranger things have happened on the frontier." A log shifted in the fire, sending up a spray of sparks. Later that night, as the fire died down and the forest settled into quiet, Daniel set up two bedrolls, one beneath a tall fir for himself, the other by the fire for Violet. Heavier blankets on hers, extra padding beneath hers. Nothing about his actions felt forced or awkward. "Sleep," he said softly once everything was in place. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Violet lay down, watching him as he settled a respectful distance away, back turned toward her, but close enough that she could hear his steady breathing. The cold mountain air wrapped around them both, but the warmth of the fire, his fire, pushed it back. She had never slept outside before. She had never shared a campsite with anyone, let alone a husband. And yet, with the crackling fire between them, the creek murmuring nearby, and Daniel Frost watching over their camp like a silent guardian, she felt safe, truly safe. For the first time in her life, the Frost homestead appeared on the third afternoon of travel, tucked deep in a valley where the mountains rose like ancient sentinels around a clearing of green grass and tall pines. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimney, dissolving into the blue sky. A creek wound behind the cabin, clear and cold, its sound constant and soothing. Violet reined in her horse and stared. It wasn't grand, it wasn't large, but it was beautiful. 2 rooms, solid logs, a sturdy porch, a barn with a slanted roof, a garden plot, a chicken coop, and a woodshed stacked neatly to the side. Every piece of it looked touched by careful hands, built with patience rather than wealth. Daniel watched her quietly. "It's not much," he said, "but it's home. And now it's yours, too." Violet's throat tightened. "It's more than I've ever had." Daniel dismounted and helped her down, as he had each day, never making her feel clumsy, never commenting when the stirrup creaked or the saddle groaned beneath her weight. He simply braced her steady and let her find her footing. He led her into the cabin. Inside was warm and clean. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with canned goods and dried herbs, and a big iron stove. To the left was Daniel's bedroom. She glimpsed a large bed, neatly made, with a handmade quilt tucked perfectly at the corners. The right-hand room was empty, save for a few wooden crates pushed into the corner. Daniel stood beside her, hat in hand. "This was going to be the nursery," he said quietly. "Catherine, my wife, she wanted a big family. After she died, I didn't want to use this room. I just closed the door and left it." Violet touched the doorframe gently. She could feel the grief still lingering in the wood. "We'll make it yours," Daniel added quickly, as if afraid she'd think she was intruding. "I'll move a bed in, a dresser. Curtains if you want them." "I'd like that," she said softly. He nodded once, relief flickering across his face. Over the next few hours, Violet watched him transform the empty room. He brought in a bed frame he'd built years ago, a thick straw mattress he fluffed and turned carefully, a dresser polished smooth by time, and a small table for her lamp. He hung curtains, simple cotton ones, and laid a quilt across the bed. Not just any quilt, a gorgeous one, patterned in deep blues and burgundy, hand-stitched with care. This was Catherine's favorite, Daniel said, fingers brushing the edge. She'd want someone to use it. Violet swallowed hard. Are you sure? He nodded. I'm sure. It felt like being given part of someone's heart. After the room was set up, Violet unpacked the few things she'd brought. 2 dresses, her mother's handkerchief, a tin of buttons, her hairbrush, and a small Bible. It wasn't much, but in this cabin, it felt like a beginning. That evening, Violet cooked the first meal of her new life, stew from salt pork, potatoes, carrots, and wild onions Daniel had gathered on the trail. She moved around the kitchen awkwardly at first, unfamiliar with the layout, but soon she found her rhythm. Daniel split wood outside, but she could see his shadow through the window, glancing in every now and then, making sure she was all right. When she set the bowl in front of him at the table, he blinked. "You're letting me eat first?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "You've done the work today." Daniel shook his head, pushed the bowl toward her. "A man eats after his wife. That's how my father raised me." Violet stared at him. Men in Copper Ridge had never waited their turn. They'd eaten in front of her, laughed that she must want double portions, teased her about her size. Her own father, loving though he was, had never considered letting her eat before him. "Go on," Daniel said with a shy half-smile. "It's good manners." Violet's eyes burned, but she sat, and she ate first. Daniel ate next, quietly, gratefully. After supper, he repaired a loose hinge on the door while she swept the floor. When she'd finished, Daniel handed her a small bundle. "What's this?" she asked. "Your room needs a rug," he said. "I made this one last winter." She unfolded it, thick wool, braided, dyed in warm browns and reds. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel shrugged, almost embarrassed. "Just something to keep your feet warm in the mornings." For the first time since leaving Copper Ridge, Violet felt a bloom of warmth in her chest that wasn't fear or exhaustion. It was hope. Days turned into routines. Violet woke early to make breakfast. Cornmeal mush, eggs, sometimes biscuits if she had enough flour. Daniel always rose before first light, chopping wood or hauling water, his strong silhouette moving through the dawn mist. After breakfast, Daniel taught her how to milk the goat. Her hands were clumsy at first, but he guided her gently, never laughing, when she splashed milk on herself or the bucket. When she finally managed a full pail, he grinned at her, really grinned, warm and proud. "That's better than I did my first time," he said. "You'll be a natural soon." The praise lit something inside her she'd forgotten existed. They tended the garden together. Daniel showed her how to check the soil, how to spot signs of pests, how to harvest without damaging the roots. He let her pick the tomatoes even though she wasn't confident. She braced herself for criticism that never came. "You got a good hand for it," he said. "Plants know when someone's gentle." She tried repairing the chicken coop roof one morning while Daniel chopped wood. She slipped once, nearly falling off the stool. He dropped the axe, crossed the yard in 3 strides, steadying her with his big, warm hands. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, embarrassed. "Just clumsy." He paused. "You're not clumsy. You're learning." No man had ever corrected her self-blame before. Evenings were Violet's favorite. They ate by lamplight, Daniel asking casually about her day, never prying, never pushing, just listening. After supper, he carved small wooden animals while she mended shirts by the fire. His quiet presence didn't demand anything of her. It simply existed, steady as the mountains around them. One night, as a cold wind rattled the window shutters, Violet stirred the embers of the fire and murmured, "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Daniel didn't look up from his carving. "I used to." "And now?" He hesitated, then softly, "Now it feels like a home again." The words sank deep into her heart, and still Daniel kept his distance where it mattered. He never entered her room, never touched her without need, never suggested that their marriage meant anything beyond partnership, unless she chose otherwise. Every act of kindness, every small courtesy, every quiet moment by the fire planted seeds inside her, seeds of confidence, of comfort, of something she didn't dare name yet. But it was growing day by day, hour by hour. In the cabin he had built for another woman, Violet felt herself becoming someone new, someone capable, someone worthy, someone seen, someone who might someday be loved. Winter arrived early in the mountains that year. By late November, fresh snow lay thick on the roof, softening the edges of the cabin. The creek slowed to a narrow ribbon under sheets of ice, and the air outside turned sharp enough to sting the lungs. Inside, however, the cabin glowed warm with firelight and the quiet rhythm of two people learning the edges of each other's lives. But as Violet settled into this newfound peace, the world beyond their valley continued to shift, and shadows, long ignored, began to lengthen. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter. Daniel returned one afternoon from checking his trap lines, snow dusting his shoulders, a folded envelope tucked into his coat. He handed it to Violet without explanation, his brow furrowed. "It was left at the old cedar post on the ridge," he said. "That's where riders usually leave messages meant for the homesteads." Violet took the envelope, her stomach twisting. No one sent her letters. No one even knew where she lived now except her father. The handwriting was his. She tore it open with trembling fingers. Daniel watched quietly, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe, giving her space. Violet read aloud. "Violet, my sweetheart, I write to warn you. Victor Thornton has not let go of what happened. Word in town is he's stirring up trouble again. He can't undo the marriage, but he's telling anyone who'll listen that you and Daniel tricked him. Be careful. Your loving father, George Henderson." The paper shook in Violet's hand. Daniel's jaw clenched. "He's still at it." "I thought we were done with him," Violet whispered. "I thought once we left town—" "Men like Thornton don't forget being outplayed," Daniel said, "especially not by a woman they underestimated. He'll want to prove he still has power." "But what can he do now?" Violet asked. Daniel hesitated. "Land speculators like him don't play by the rules everyone else lives by. If he can't come at you through marriage contracts, he'll find another angle: lies, rumors, legal pressure, hired guns." Violet's heart dropped. "Hired guns?" Daniel met her eyes steadily. "He has money, Violet. Money buys men without conscience." For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Violet felt the old weight of fear pressing into her chest. Tight, breath stealing. "Are we safe here?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He crossed the room, took the letter, and stared at it as if it might reveal more truth. Then he folded it carefully. "You're safer here than anywhere else," he said, "but I need to tell you something I should have told you earlier." The room grew still. Daniel stepped back, bracing his hands on the table, eyes lowered. He looked suddenly older, worn in a way Violet hadn't seen before. "I wasn't just a scout during the war," he said quietly. "I was a tracker for the Army. My unit handled difficult things, people who needed finding or stopping." Violet listened, pulse quickening. "When I left the service," Daniel continued, "I thought I could build a new life. But there were men I crossed, men who didn't forget, men who'd like to see me dead." Violet's breath caught. "Daniel, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel unsafe, but you deserve to know the truth. Thornton isn't the only snake in the grass." Silence. Heavy. Cold. Real. Violet stepped closer, searching his face. "Are any of those men still looking for you?" Daniel gave a small, grim smile. "If they're alive, maybe. But most of them didn't fare much better than I did." "Then you're not in danger now?" He lifted one shoulder. "Danger's part of the mountains, always has been. But I know how to handle it." Violet wanted to believe him. She wanted to say the fear in her chest was just winter settling in. But something about the way he avoided her eyes told her more than he said. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for her. That night, they heard the first faint echo of trouble, a distant crack, like a branch snapping under weight, or a boot stepping on frozen ground. Daniel was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle above the mantel. "Stay here," he said. He opened the door slowly, peering into the dark. Violet stood by the fire, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might echo into the night. Minutes passed. Finally, Daniel returned, closing the door softly behind him. Nothing. Probably just an elk passing through. But when he set the rifle beside the bedroll, he slept on. He didn't put it back on the wall. That wasn't nothing. Days passed with tension tucked beneath the surface. Violet cooked, cleaned, tended the chickens, but her thoughts drifted to shadows outside the window. Daniel repaired the fence, chopped wood, checked traps, but he always positioned himself between her and the tree line when they walked outside. He wasn't nervous. He was watchful. Then another shadow fell across their fragile peace. One morning, Violet went to collect snow from the barrel behind the cabin for melting into drinking water. At first, she saw nothing unusual, but when she lifted the wooden scoop, she froze. Boot prints, deep ones, fresh ones, and not from Daniel. Her breath seized in her chest. She backed away slowly, heart slamming against her ribs, and hurried inside. "Daniel," she whispered, voice trembling. He looked up from sharpening a tool, instantly alert. "What is it?" She pointed toward the back door. Daniel stepped outside with the rifle, kneeling beside the prints. His face hardened. He touched the snow lightly, gauging the depth, direction, number. "One man," he murmured, came close, turned around before reaching the cabin. He rose, scanning the woods. "These prints weren't here yesterday?" Violet swallowed. "Do you think it's Thornton's men?" "I don't know," Daniel said grimly, "but someone is watching this place." Fear crawled icy fingers up Violet's spine. Then shame, because part of her wondered if this danger had followed Daniel rather than her. His past, his ghosts, his unspoken battles. He must have sensed her doubt, because he turned to her, eyes fierce. "This isn't your fault," he said, "and I won't let any harm come to you, not from Thornton, not from anyone else." His voice shook slightly on the last word. It was the first time Violet had seen Daniel frightened, not for himself, for her. She reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "We'll face it," she said softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Daniel looked at her with something raw in his gaze, respect, gratitude, something deeper he never named. Before either of them could speak again, a sound echoed through the trees, the sharp crack of a rifle, not close, but not far enough away. Daniel stepped in front of her instantly, pushing her toward the cabin. "Inside," he ordered, "now." And just like that, peace broke. The second gunshot came before Violet could reach the door. This one was closer, sharper, a sound that cracked through the frozen air and rang off the mountains like a warning bell. Daniel grabbed her arm, steady but urgent, and rushed her inside. He shut the door with a force that rattled the hinges, then slid the heavy wooden bar across it. "Stay low," he said, voice controlled but edged with steel. He moved quickly, checking the shutters, banking the fire so its glow wouldn't spill through the cracks. Violet crouched near the table, her breath coming in quick, shallow pulls. "Daniel," she whispered, "is someone—" He didn't let her finish. "They're close," he said, steadying his rifle with practiced ease. "And they're not hunting deer." A fist pounded against the door. Violet flinched. Daniel raised the rifle, aimed at the door but didn't fire. His voice was flat, cold. "State your business." A familiar voice answered, smooth, mocking, unmistakable. "Well now, is this how you welcome guests, Mr. Frost?" "Thornton." Violet's blood turned to ice. Daniel didn't lower the rifle. "You've come a long way, Thornton. I thought men like you stayed warm in town counting their money." A chuckle drifted through the door. "Oh, I can count just fine, and I count a debt that hasn't been paid. You humiliated me, Frost. You embarrassed me in front of half the territory. And you," his voice sharpened, "you stole what was mine." Daniel didn't move. "She was never yours." Thornton ignored him. "Let's not dance around this. I have 2 hired men with me. You open this door and hand the girl over, and I'll forget the insult. I'll even leave you alive." Violet squeezed her hands into fists. Her voice trembled, but she managed to call out, "I'm not your property. You can't—" "You think marriage changes anything?" Thornton snapped. "Think a big girl in a white dress erases a contract? You owe me, Violet Henderson. Your father owes me." Daniel's voice cut through like a knife. "Grab your father's sins and take them back down the mountain. You're not getting anywhere near her." Silence. Then a low, dark laugh. "You think you can stop us?" Daniel finally lowered the rifle just long enough to look at Violet. His eyes softened, but his jaw remained set, with grim determination. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Do not move." Her breath caught. "Daniel," he touched her cheek with a gloved hand. "I won't let him touch you." Then he slid the back door open just enough to slip through, leaving Violet in the dim room, heart pounding as fast as the wind whipping against the cabin walls. Outside, the snow swallowed sound. Daniel stayed low, using the shadows of the trees, moving like a man who'd spent a lifetime navigating danger. Violet crept toward the shutter and peered through a sliver. Thornton stood in the clearing, 2 armed men flanking him. His coat was lined with fur, his boots polished even in the wilderness, but his face was red from the cold and from rage. Daniel stepped out from behind a pine, rifle raised, not shaking, not hesitant, solid as bedrock. "Last chance," Daniel called. "Turn around and walk away." Thornton scoffed. "Shoot me, and my men will kill your wife before she finishes screaming." Violet covered her mouth, swallowing a cry. Daniel's voice didn't waver. "I know your type, Thornton. You're not a man who fires first. You're a man who hides behind others." Thornton's eye twitched. "And the men you hire," Daniel continued, "they're not paid enough to die for you." One of the thugs shifted. The other exchanged a glance. Thornton's jaw tightened. "I said," Daniel repeated, "walk away." Thornton snarled, "Take him!" Both hired men reached for their holsters. Daniel's rifle cracked like lightning. Snow burst at one man's feet. He froze, not wounded, but shaken enough to realize Daniel Frost had chosen not to kill. "Next one goes through your leg," Daniel warned. The man swallowed, lifted his hands, and backed away. The second hesitated only a breath before doing the same. Thornton spun, furious. "Cowards! Get back here!" But they didn't. They ran. Now only Daniel and Thornton stood in the clearing. Violet pressed closer to the shutter, breath trembling in her chest. Thornton pointed his pistol at Daniel with a shaken hand. "I'll kill you myself." Daniel didn't blink. "Then you best shoot straight." The pistol wavered. Thornton's hand shook harder. Daniel took one slow step forward, then another, until the barrel of the pistol nearly touched his coat. "Go on," Daniel said quietly. "Pull the trigger." Thornton's lips trembled. His bravado cracked. He lowered the gun. "You'll regret this," he spat, backing away. "Both of you will." Daniel didn't move until Thornton disappeared into the trees, stumbling after the trail left by his fleeing men. Only then did he exhale. Only then did Violet burst through the door, running toward him and throwing her arms around him before she even realized what she was doing. He wrapped her against him instantly. "It's over," he whispered into her hair, breath warm in the cold night. "You're safe." She clung to him, crying into his coat. She didn't notice the way his hands trembled, but she felt the quiet truth in the way he held her. He would have died for her, without hesitation. The fire burned low in the hearth that night, casting a soft orange glow across the cabin walls. Snow whispered against the windows, a quiet reminder of the world outside, cold, dangerous, vast. But inside, warmth wrapped around Violet and Daniel like a blanket. After the confrontation, Daniel had guided her back into the cabin without a word, closing the door gently behind them. He checked the shutters twice, set his rifle beside the mantel, and banked the fire higher. His movements were calm, practiced. But Violet saw the truth in the tightness of his jaw, in the tremor that lingered in his fingers. He had come within a breath of dying for her. Now he sat at the table, shoulders tense, staring at the flames as though replaying every second of the encounter. Violet approached slowly, then sank into the chair beside him. "You saved me," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I didn't say I owed you," she replied gently. "I said you saved me." He looked down, as if embarrassed by the truth. Violet studied him. The strong lines of his face, the quiet worry etched into his brow, the way exhaustion softened him. This man, who had been a stranger only months ago, had stood between her and a bullet without hesitation. "Daniel," she said softly, "are you all right?" He exhaled slowly. "I've had men point guns at me before. That part isn't new." He paused, voice thickening. "What's new is having someone to lose." Violet froze. Daniel's eyes flicked up, meeting hers with a raw honesty he'd kept hidden until now. "When Thornton aimed at me today," he said. "I wasn't scared for myself. I was scared for you, scared of what would happen to you if I didn't stop him." Her breath caught in her throat. He continued, quieter now. "This cabin hasn't felt like a home for a long time. Not since I buried Catherine. I thought that part of my life was done forever." Violet reached out, hesitant but sure, laying her hand over his. Daniel's fingers tightened around hers instinctively. "You brought something back into this place," he murmured. "Into me." Her eyes blurred with tears she didn't try to stop. "And you gave me something I never had," she whispered. "Safety, respect, a future I didn't think I deserved." Daniel turned fully toward her then, taking her hands in his voice steady, but trembling at the edges. "You're safe here, Violet," he said. "You're safe with me, and this home. It's yours now, if you want it." The words settled around her like warm air rising from the fire. She wiped her cheeks, smiling through her tears. "I want it," she said, "more than anything." Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls as if trying to claw its way inside. But it didn't matter, not anymore. In the soft golden light, Violet leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close in a gesture that held no fear, no hesitation, only quiet devotion. The fire crackled. Their breaths mingled in the warm air, and somewhere in the mountains beyond, danger still lurked. But inside this little cabin, hope had rooted itself deep and strong. A question lingered unspoken between them, one that only time could answer. Could this fragile, unexpected love survive everything waiting beyond their valley? Stories like Violet and Daniel's remind us that the frontier was more than dust, danger, and distance. It was a place where broken lives could be rebuilt, where unexpected love could take root in the harshest soil, and where one act of courage could change the course of a lifetime. If you're listening right now, wherever you are in the world, know this: your comments and your presence here mean more than you realize. Tell us, where are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe in love that defies the odds, don't go far. The next story is waiting for you. Let the fat one freeze. Town abandoned obese woman in blizzard, mountain man's choice. Let the fat one freeze. She'll last longer than the rest of us anyway. The insult cracked across the crowded way station like a whip. In the dim light of two weak fireplaces, 32 travelers turned to stare at the woman huddled alone in the farthest corner. Flora Bradshaw, tried to press herself into the log wall, but at nearly 180 kilograms, there was no way to disappear. The blizzard outside screamed against the shutters. Inside, their cruelty howled even louder. This story comes from the frozen passes of the Old West, where one woman was chosen as the sacrifice so the others could live. Before I go on, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Tell me in the comments, and stay with me to hear what happened to the woman they tried to throw away. It was the 4th day of the storm over Deadwood Pass. Snow had swallowed the trail, and the way station, a low timbered cabin meant for a few guests, was crammed so tight people slept sitting up. Men argued in hoarse whispers about food, about fuel, about who might freeze first when the logs ran out. Flora sat as far from the fire as they would allow, wrapped in a thin gray shawl that barely covered her broad shoulders. Her fingers were numb, her breath a pale, shaky cloud. Every time someone muttered about wasted space or extra mouths, Their eyes slid toward her like knives. "We're almost out of oats," Samuel Pritchard, the station keeper, announced, shaking a nearly empty sack. "2 days at most, if we all tighten our belts." Richard Graves, a wealthy rancher in a fur-lined coat, did not bother to lower his voice. "Some of us have already tightened our belts," he said, nodding toward his daughters. "Others have reserves. Why should my girl starve while she eats for 3? Laughter, sharp and ugly, rippled through the room. Flora's cheeks burned. She had eaten less than anyone for 2 days, forcing herself to stop halfway through every bowl. But to them, she was nothing but flesh and appetite. "I say we cut her rations in half," Graves went on. "Simple mathematics. We choose who has the better chance to live." Hands went up across the room, some slow and shaking, others quick and cold. No one asked what Flora wanted. No one asked if she was afraid. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. As the vote against her life was counted, the door suddenly shuddered, then flew open in a blast of snow and ice. A gigantic figure filled the doorway, wrapped in bear skin and leather, beard crusted with frost, eyes like winter steel. He stepped inside, slammed the door, and his gaze swept the room before fixing on the shivering woman in the corner. "Who," the mountain man asked quietly, "decided she should be the one to freeze?" Silas Kane stood just inside the doorway, snow melting down his bearskin coat, the wind still roaring behind him as if unwilling to let him go. At 6'7" and built like a man carved from the mountains themselves, he made the cramped way station feel even smaller. But it wasn't his size that silenced the room. It was the look in his eyes, calm, cold, unimpressed by the cowardice he'd walked into. Flora Bradshaw watched him with a numb kind of disbelief. She'd spent the past 4 days shrinking into herself while the others pushed her further from the fire, further from any scrap of safety. Her throat was raw from breathing cold air. Her body ached from sitting on the frozen floorboards. Her chest tightened with each mocking whisper that she took up too much space. But now, a stranger, this wild mountain man, looked at her as if he saw a person, not a burden. Silas's voice was low, nearly swallowed by the crackle of the fire. "I asked who decided she should be sitting back here freezing." The room shifted uneasily, no one eager to answer. Richard Graves cleared his throat. "We're rationing warmth. The children don't learn decency by watching adults betray it," Silas cut in, walking forward with slow, heavy steps. The crowd parted instinctively as he approached Flora. "Can you stand?" Flora hesitated. She'd learned the hard way not to reach for what wasn't offered freely, but his tone held no mockery, only concern. She nodded, pushing her hands against the wall to lift herself. Her knees buckled from hours of cold, and she pitched forward. Silas caught her instantly, strong, steady hands gripping her arms, pulling her into balance with surprising gentleness for a man his size. "Easy," he murmured. "You're half frozen." No one had touched her kindly in years. The unexpected warmth made her eyes sting. With a firm but careful grip, Silas guided her toward the main fireplace. The group huddled there moved aside without complaint this time. The mountain man didn't even raise his voice. Authority radiated from him like heat. He lowered Flora onto a stool close to the flames, then shrugged off his own bearskin cloak and draped it around her shoulders. The fur swallowed her, warm and heavy, smelling of smoke and pine and something distinctly him. Her voice trembled. "Thank you." Silas didn't answer immediately. He crouched beside her, studying her face with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not pity, not disgust. Something quieter, sharper, as if he was evaluating the truth of a wound he'd only heard rumors of, but now saw clearly. "When did you last eat properly?" he asked. "Yesterday morning," Flora admitted, ashamed of how small her voice sounded. "They voted to give me half rations." Silas stood slowly. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much suffering to tolerate any more. "Half rations for her, full rations for yourselves." He scanned the room. "That's the logic you've been using?" Pritchard tried to speak. We didn't have a choice. Supplies—" "There's always a choice," Silas said, "and you all made the wrong one." A murmur spread across the room, defensive, uneasy. Richard Graves squared his shoulders. "Look here, sir, we were only trying to survive. She requires more than the rest of us. It's not personal." "It's entirely personal," Silas replied. "You looked at her and decided she was worth less than you. That's not survival. That's cowardice wrapped in arithmetic." A few people lowered their eyes. Tommy, the young man who had tried to defend Flora earlier, stood straighter, relief flickering across his face. Flora pulled the bearskin tighter around her. She should have been grateful for the warmth, but humiliation gnawed at her. "They're not all cruel," she whispered. "Some are just scared." Silas glanced at her, his expression softening for a moment. "Fear doesn't excuse cruelty." Flora looked away. She'd heard cruelty her whole life, jokes about her size, whispers behind her back, lectures about how she should try harder. But never before had she been marked for death simply because she weighed more. Silas straightened and surveyed the room once more. "This storm will break soon. When it does, she leaves with me." The declaration hit Flora like a shock. She stared at him. I don't even know you." "You don't need to," Silas said simply. "You need a place where no one sees you as a burden. I have room, and I don't abandon people." Richard scoffed. "You'd carry her through the mountains out of charity." Silas turned, and the air seemed to tighten around him. "Not charity," he said. "Honor." No one spoke after that. The fire crackled. The blizzard roared. And Flora realized that for the first time in days, maybe years, she wasn't invisible. She had been seen, and perhaps she had been chosen. The storm broke at dawn like a curtain being pulled back from the world. Sunlight spilled over Deadwood Pass, turning the snow-blanketed mountains into a blinding sheet of white. The travelers rushed to gather their things. Fear had made them cruel, and now daylight made them guilty. No one knew quite how to look Flora in the eye. Silas Kane said nothing to any of them. He saddled his horses with the quiet efficiency of a man used to surviving alone. When he approached Flora, she stood awkwardly near the station steps, her small bag clutched to her chest. "You ride the mare," Silas said, gesturing to a stocky dun horse with calm eyes. "She's steady and strong." "I'm heavy," Flora said, her voice shrinking. "Are you sure she can—" "I don't own an animal that can't carry what needs carrying," he answered simply. "Go on." He said it with such matter-of-fact certainty that the knot in her chest loosened. Silas cupped his hands to give her a lift onto the saddle. His touch was firm but careful, and when she settled on the mare, the horse snorted softly, unbothered. Silas swung easily onto his own massive gelding, then nodded to the trail ahead. "Stay close. Snow hides danger." As they rode away, Tommy, the only one who had defended her, called out, "Good luck, Miss Bradshaw." Flora glanced back and saw the boy's hopeful face. She managed a small wave. Richard Graves didn't look at her at all. The world outside the station was breathtaking and brutal. Snow drifts climbed higher than Flora's waist, and the wind cut like knives when it swept down the slopes. The trail was narrow, sometimes nothing more than a faint indentation in the snow, winding between pines bowed heavy with ice. Silas led in silence, but it wasn't a cold silence. It felt steady, protective. Flora's breath fogged the air, her cheeks stinging as they rode deeper into the mountains. She kept expecting him to look back with impatience, to tell her she was slowing him down. He never did. Twice he stopped to adjust her cloak when the wind blew it loose. Once he reached over and handed her a small piece of dried venison without a word. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth spreading through her chest. Hours passed. The sky darkened with gathering clouds, though the storm had ended. Flora shivered as a gust of wind tore across the ridge. "We'll stop soon," Silas said. "There's a cave ahead. Good shelter." She wanted to ask how he knew, how he could read the mountains as if they spoke to him, but she was too cold to speak much. Still, she watched him. The sure way he handled the reins, the way he scanned the horizon, always alert, the way he positioned his horse slightly ahead and to the left, placing himself between her and the steepest drops. For the first time in years, she felt safe. They reached the cave shortly before dusk. It wasn't large, but it was dry and partially shielded by rock. Silas dismounted, tied the horses, and began clearing snow from the entrance. "Stay where it's dry," he instructed. "I'll build a fire." Flora obeyed, settling onto a flat rock inside. Her fingers throbbed painfully as they thawed. Silas worked methodically, gathering kindling from a small pouch, stacking it, striking flint. Soon a bright flame flickered, casting warm light across the stone walls. Flora let out a shaky breath. "I'm sorry if I'm slowing you down." Silas looked over his shoulder. "You're not. I know I'm not easy to travel with." "You're cold and tired," Silas said. "Anyone would be." But people hadn't treated her like anyone in a very long time. She blinked hard, trying to steady her voice. "Why did you help me?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He tossed another log onto the fire, sparks rising. "Because someone should have. Because leaving you behind would have made me no better than the people who voted to throw you out." Flora hugged her knees, the cloak pooling around her. "You don't even know me. I know enough to see you deserved better than what they gave you." Silence settled, warm and glowing. Flora watched him make tea. Real tea, not the bitter bark water the station keeper had served. He handed her a tin cup, careful not to touch her chilled fingers. "Drink," he said. "You'll warm faster." The first sip made her close her eyes. Heat spread through her belly, loosening the tight knot of fear that had lodged there for days. Silas leaned back against the cave wall, arms resting over his knees. "Where were you headed before the storm caught you?" "Denver," Flora whispered. "My aunt promised work. I didn't have much choice." He nodded slowly, as if turning that over. "You'll get there when you're ready. But tonight, you rest." Flora stared into the fire. Rest. The word felt foreign, rare. She looked up at the giant mountain man sitting opposite her, illuminated by firelight, scarred, weather-beaten, silent. A man who had crossed a blizzard to check on strangers. A man who had stood up for her when no one else did. "Thank you," she said softly. Silas met her gaze, and something warm flickered there. "You don't owe me thanks." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but inside the cave, between firelight and the steady presence of a man who did not treat her like excess or burden, Flora felt the first fragile stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. They reached Silas Kane's cabin just after noon the next day. Flora expected a rough shack, something barely standing against the mountain winters. Instead, a large, beautifully crafted two-story log home rose from the clearing like it had grown straight from the earth itself. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. A broad porch wrapped around the front. A barn stood a short distance away, its roof thick with snow, and from behind the cabin bounded a massive husky with silver and black fur, barking in deep, joyful notes. "That's Bear," Silas said as he helped Flora dismount. "He looks intimidating, but he's on your side as long as you're breathing." The dog trotted right up to Flora, sniffed her boots, then leaned his enormous head against her leg as if claiming her. She laughed softly, her first true laugh in days, and ran her fingers over his thick fur. The warmth, the softness, the simple welcome from an animal who saw no fault in her. It was almost too much. Silas watched her with a quiet expression she couldn't quite name. "He likes you?" Inside, the cabin was warm and sunlit. A big stone fireplace dominated the main room, its fire crackling merrily. Thick rugs covered the wooden floor. A sturdy dining table stood near the kitchen area. A ladder led to a loft above, and two doors opened into small side rooms. Flora stopped just inside the doorway, overwhelmed. "This is beautiful." Silas shrugged, almost embarrassed. "Built it myself. Needed something to keep my hands busy." He motioned to the door on the left. "That'll be your room. It's small, but it's warm. I don't keep much in it." She stepped inside and gasped. A tidy space with a window overlooking the pines. A bed with a thick quilt, a small dresser, a lantern, nothing extravagant, just clean, quiet, safe, safe. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "You can lock it from the inside," Silas added gently. "Whenever you want, always." That night, she ate the first full meal she'd tasted in weeks. Hot stew, thick with vegetables and venison, fresh bread Silas had baked that morning, and a sweet berry tea he said he'd harvested the leaves for himself. She tried to hide how desperately hungry she was, but Silas noticed anyway. "Eat," he said, sliding a second ladle of stew into her bowl. "You need strength after days in that station." "But no arguments," he insisted. "My cabin, my rules." Something warm, almost shy, stirred in her chest. The days that followed settled into a rhythm she'd never known before. In the mornings, the cabin hummed with soft activity. Silas would stoke the fire while she made breakfast. He taught her how to fry eggs on cast iron, how to bake biscuits that rose high and fluffy, how to spice stew so it warmed from the inside out. "Cook eats first," Silas would say gruffly every morning, pushing her plate forward before he touched his own. "No, you—" "Cook eats first," he repeated, "every time, without fail." At first she thought he was teasing her. Later she understood it was respect. Some mornings, when she protested more stubbornly, he'd add quietly, "You spend enough of your life being told you deserve less. Not here, not with me." In the afternoons, they worked around the cabin. Flora swept floors and organized shelves, knitted wool mittens, tended the chickens behind the barn. Silas repaired the roof shingles that winter storms had loosened or fetched firewood from the forest. But he never left her alone with tasks that were heavy or dangerous. Instead, he taught her. "This is how you swing an axe without hurting your back," he'd say, positioning her hands properly. "Here, feel where the weight is. This is how you walk in deep snow without sinking. This is how you tell when a storm's coming." He wasn't a talkative man, but he talked to her, and she found herself talking back. There was something about the cabin, the firelight, the quiet companionship. She could feel herself thawing from the inside out. Evenings were her favorite. They would sit near the fire, she at the rocking chair, Silas on the floor beside Bear, sharpening his knife or carving something from a block of wood. He always carved in silence, but he always carved with purpose. Little wooden animals she found on the windowsill the next morning, or spoons he left drying on the table. Sometimes, after dinner, Silas would look up from his work and say, "Flora, tell me something about your childhood." She'd talk about Philadelphia, about the father who'd loved her fiercely, the mother who'd remarried a cruel man, the stepbrother who mocked her weight. Her voice would break sometimes. Silas never interrupted, never pitied. He just listened, really listened, as if every word mattered. In return, he told her pieces of himself, his time in the war, the wife he'd lost to fever, the years he'd tried to disappear into the mountains. One evening, after a long day of chores, Silas surprised her with a small gesture that nearly undid her. She had fallen asleep in the rocking chair. When she woke, she found herself tucked neatly into her bed, quilt drawn up to her chin. Someone, Silas, had placed a small carved wooden bird on the nightstand, the kind of gift no one had ever given her. The next morning, she found him outside chopping wood, muscles straining beneath his shirt. She wanted to thank him, wanted to say something, but the words lodged in her throat. He didn't look up from his work, but he spoke first anyway. "You slept deeply. That's good." "I haven't slept like that in years," she admitted. "That's what safety does," Silas replied. "Takes time to feel it, longer to believe it." Flora looked at him then, really looked. The scar that cut across his eyebrow, the calloused hands, the quiet steadiness, the way he made room for her without ever making her feel like she had to earn it. Something warm, frightening, and beautiful stirred in her chest. She didn't say it yet. She couldn't. But every day she spent in that cabin made the truth harder to hide. She was falling in love with the man who'd saved her, and in every small gesture, the wooden bird, the extra stew, the lessons by the firelight, Silas Kane was quietly falling in love with her too. Spring crept slowly over the mountains, turning the world from white to green. Snowmelt roared through the ravines. Pine needles glistened with dew. Flora woke each morning to birdsong instead of people whispering about her weight, and every day she felt stronger in ways her younger self would never have believed. But the peace could not last forever. It began with a single letter. Silas returned from a supply trip one afternoon carrying flour, salt, and a sealed envelope. Flora was kneading dough at the table when he set it before her. "Came through the post rider in town," he said, "addressed to you." Her hands froze. No one wrote to her. No one cared enough to. She wiped her fingers and broke the seal with trembling hands. The letter was from her aunt in Denver. 3 short lines. "Flora, I have moved east. Circumstances changed. I cannot take you in. No explanation, no farewell, no apology. Flora stared at the words until they blurred. It was rejection in its purest form, delivered with the efficiency of a business receipt. Silas watched her face shift, shock, hurt, quiet humiliation, and his jaw tightened. "You can stay here," he said immediately, firmly. "For how long?" Flora whispered. "How long until I become a burden?" "You're not." "I am," she interrupted, voice cracking. "People don't leave others behind unless they're tired of carrying them." Silas stepped closer, but she turned away. The past clawed its way up her throat, memories of being too big, too much, too expensive, too heavy to love. Silas didn't push. He never pushed, but his eyes followed her for the rest of the day, sharp with concern. That evening, as they ate stew by lamplight, a knock thundered against the front door. Bear leapt to his feet, growling deep in his throat. Silas motioned Flora behind him, not protectively out of pity, but instinctively, like any threat to her was a threat to him. He opened the door. 3 men stood on the porch, the sheriff of Millbrook, a railroad agent in a bowler hat, and a 4th figure Flora didn't recognize at first, her stepbrother. Her stomach turned to ice. "Evening, Kane," the sheriff said. "We're here for a woman you're harboring." Silas's grip tightened on the door. "No woman here is harboring anything. Explain yourselves." The railroad man stepped forward, adjusting his hat. "Miss Bradshaw, your guest, is the rightful heir to a parcel of land outside Denver, prime rail territory. Her father left it in a deed before he passed. That deed entitles her to compensation from the company." Silas frowned. "Compensation sounds like a good thing. Why come with a sheriff?" The railroad man's expression hardened. "Because her step-family claims she forged the document. They petitioned us last month. Legal trouble follows her, Mr. Kane." Flora clutched her apron, breath shallow. "Forged?" she whispered. "I didn't even know about the deed." Her stepbrother finally stepped forward, smirking in that familiar, hateful way. "Oh, you didn't know? Pity. Because once you sign the papers we brought, you can confess everything and hand the deed to me." Silas stepped fully into the doorway, blocking view of Flora. "Get off my porch." "She's a liar and a thief," the stepbrother snarled. "She always has been. You think she belongs here? Look at her. She—" He didn't finish. Silas's voice cut through the air like an axe blade. "You talk about her weight one more time, and you won't walk down my mountain." The sheriff swallowed. "Easy now, Kane. We just need the girl to come answer to the claims." "A claim built on what?" Silas asked. "A land deed she hasn't even seen? Manufactured accusations to steal what's hers?" The railroad man stiffened. "If she refuses to come, we'll mark her a fugitive." Flora finally found her voice. "I'm not a fugitive." "Then come to Denver and prove it," the stepbrother sneered. "And while you're there, maybe confess the truth. You don't deserve a penny of what father left." Silas turned halfway, just enough to look at her. "You don't have to go anywhere with these men." Flora's heart hammered painfully. She didn't want to leave. This cabin was the only place she'd ever belonged. But if she stayed, she would drag trouble to Silas's door. She had already taken so much from him: warmth, food, a room, kindness she never thought she'd receive. I should go with them," she whispered, voice trembling. "Clear my name. I can't bring this trouble on you." Silas's expression darkened, something wounded passing through his eyes before he masked it. "Flora, I decide what's trouble, and you are not that." The sheriff stepped forward. "Miss Bradshaw, if you come willingly, no one gets hurt. Silas's hand hovered near his holster, not threatening, just ready. Flora looked between them all, the man who had saved her from a blizzard and the men who had delivered nothing but betrayal her entire life. "I don't want Silas fighting on my behalf," she whispered. "Not with guns, not with the law." Her hand shook as she stepped toward the door. Silas blocked her path again, gaze burning. "Flora, listen to me. You don't owe them anything, and you don't clear your name by surrendering to liars." Tears welled in her eyes. "I have to do something. I can't hide here forever." "You're not hiding," Silas said. "You're healing." The stepbrother snorted. "Healing? She's eating you out of house and home, more like—" Silas moved so fast no one saw it coming. He yanked the man forward by his coat, slammed him against the porch railing hard enough to rattle the boards, and leaned in close. "You insult her again," he growled, "and I will put you through that snowbank head first." The sheriff drew his gun halfway. Silas didn't even flinch. Flora stepped forward, voice rising, not in fear, but in strength she didn't know she possessed. "Stop," she said sharply. "All of you, stop." Everyone froze. Flora took a slow breath. "I will go to Denver, but on my terms. I will not sign anything without seeing the deed. And Silas," her voice softened, "please don't risk your life over me." Silas turned his head toward her, something heartbreaking in his expression. "I would risk far more than that." Her stepbrother smirked. "Fine. Pack your things, Flora." "I'm not packing anything," she said firmly. "If I leave this mountain, it's with Silas beside me, or not at all." The cabin fell silent. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Inside, a different storm was brewing, one that would test everything Flora had rebuilt inside herself, and test everything Silas had already begun to feel. The journey down the mountain was tense from the first step. Flora rode behind Silas, her hands gripping the saddle horn, her heart pounding with every crunch of snow beneath the horse's hooves. The sheriff and the railroad agent rode ahead. Her stepbrother lagged behind, muttering insults under his breath whenever he thought Silas wasn't listening. But Silas always listened. By the time they reached the foothills near Millbrook, storm clouds had thickened into a brooding gray ceiling. Thunder rumbled distantly. Silas kept his horse close to Flora's, eyes shifting constantly between the trail and the men escorting them. The town came into view, a scattering of saloons, a dusty main street, and the sheriff's office at the far end. People paused to stare as the group approached, whispers rising. They saw Flora first, big, out of place, visibly frightened. Their expressions shifted into familiar shapes: disapproval, judgment, amusement. She lowered her gaze, old shame gripping her throat. Silas noticed. He spoke without looking away from the street. "Keep your head up." She tried. For him, she tried. The sheriff dismounted in front of the office. "Inside. We'll sort out the paperwork." Silas stepped down first, helping Flora off the mare as if she weighed nothing at all. Her stepbrother sneered. "You think helping her down makes you some kind of hero?" Silas turned to him, jaw clenched. "I think it makes me a decent man, something you wouldn't understand." Inside, the office smelled of dust and stale coffee. Papers were spread across a desk, and the deputy fumbled through a stack of documents until he found a folded deed. "This here is what her father left," the deputy said, "signed and sealed." Flora stared. She recognized her father's handwriting instantly. The loops, the flourishes, the careful pen strokes. Her breath caught. "It's real," she whispered. "Of course it's real," her stepbrother snapped. "But she doesn't deserve it. Father only left it because he pitied her." Silas's fist hit the desk so hard the lamp rattled. "Enough!" The room froze. Silas turned to Flora, his voice softer. "Read it fully. Don't let them rush you." She nodded, scanning the document. The deed granted her a stretch of land spanning several miles, land the railroad wanted desperately for track expansion. Compensation would mean a new life, stability, independence she never thought possible. But then she saw the signature line the railroad agent had brought. "This isn't part of the deed," she said, frowning. "This is a confession statement." "A standard procedure," the agent said smoothly. "You sign, we settle the dispute, you walk away with payment." Silas stepped forward. "And you get control of the land." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Kane, stay out of—" "You dragged her off a mountain on false pretenses," Silas snapped. "You brought a forged confession. You sided with men who mocked her in your doorway." His eyes were ice. "I won't stay out of anything." The railroad agent bristled. "She's nothing but a woman looking for a handout. Fat, undisciplined—" Silas didn't let him finish. He grabbed the man by the coat, slammed him into the wall, and pressed the barrel of his revolver under his jaw. "You watch your mouth," Silas growled, "or the next words out of it will be your last." "Silas," Flora breathed, stepping closer. "Please." Her voice reached him where threats could not. Silas released the man, letting him collapse into a chair. The sheriff had half drawn his gun but now hesitated, sweating. "Let's not escalate." Flora straightened her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her father's legacy settle on her not as a burden, but as strength. "This land is mine," she said clearly. "I didn't forge anything, and I'm not signing away what belongs to me." Her stepbrother sputtered, "You useless!" "Quiet," she said, surprising even herself. "You came here to steal from me. You came with lies, and I'm done letting you speak over me." Silas's gaze flicked to her, pride glimmering there. Flora continued, voice steadying by the second. "Sheriff, if you force me to sign anything under duress, you become part of that crime." The sheriff swallowed hard. "She's right. This isn't legal." The railroad agent cursed under his breath. "Fine. Keep your damn land, but don't expect any protection when the company comes for it." Silas stepped forward. "If the company comes for her, they'll meet me first." Outside, thunder cracked, loud, violent, final. The confrontation was over. But Flora's life was about to change in a way none of them expected. Rain swept across Millbrook by the time they stepped back outside. The air was cool and sweet, washing the dust from the street and the tension from Flora's chest. She stood beneath the awning of the sheriff's office, breathing in the scent of wet earth, but her hand still trembled from fear, from relief, from everything that had almost been taken from her. Silas stood beside her, hat dripping with rain, broad shoulders blocking the wind. He didn't touch her, but his nearness wrapped around her like a second cloak. "You did good in there," he said quietly. "You stood your ground." Flora's voice was unsteady. "I only did it because you were there." Silas looked down at her, then really looked, the way he always did when he was searching for the truth beneath her words. "You don't give yourself enough credit," he murmured. "You held your own, and you didn't need me to speak for you." "But I wanted you with me," she confessed, barely above a whisper. Something softened in his expression, a tension she hadn't known was there easing from his jaw. Slowly, he removed his hat, rain pattering against his hair, and said, "You'll never walk alone again unless you choose to." Her breath hitched. "Silas!" He stepped closer, just a fraction, just enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his chest. "Flora, I don't want you to come back to the mountain because you're scared or hurting. I want you to come back because it feels like home." Her lips parted, but no words came. Raindrops clung to her eyelashes, mingling with tears she hadn't noticed forming. Silas continued, voice low and steady. "When you showed up in that way station, half frozen and still trying to make yourself small, you were the bravest person in that room. I saw that. I see it every day." She shook her head slightly. "I'm not brave." "You are," he insisted. "Brave enough to survive, brave enough to hope, brave enough to face down every person who ever tried to make you feel less." The rain grew heavier. Bear, who had waited patiently beside the horses, barked once as if urging them closer to shelter. But neither Flora nor Silas moved. "I don't know what happens next," Flora whispered. "I don't even know if I deserve a place like yours." Silas stepped close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "You deserve warmth, safety, kindness, love. You deserve everything this world tried to deny you." Her heart pounded. "And you'd want me there, even after all this trouble?" Silas's voice dropped to a whisper. "Flora Bradshaw, my door has been open to you from the moment you walked into that firelight. It'll stay open as long as you want it." Her tears slipped free, quiet, grateful, overwhelmed. She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation, his fingers closing around hers like they were meant to fit there all along. "Let's go home," she said softly. Silas nodded once. Home, then. They walked together toward the horses, not as rescuer and rescued, not as protector and burden, but as two people who had found something rare and shatteringly hopeful in the middle of a cruel world. Behind them, thunder rolled across the sky. Ahead of them, the mountain waited, rugged, wild, and full of possibility. And somewhere in that vast, quiet wilderness, the question lingered like a heartbeat. Could their fragile, impossible love survive the world beyond those cabin walls? Wherever you're listening from in the world tonight, thank you for staying with Flora's journey. Stories like hers remind us that even in the harshest winters of our lives, one act of kindness can change everything. Every comment you leave, every moment you spend here helps these stories reach someone who might need them, someone who feels unseen, unheard, or unworthy of love. So tell me, you're listening from which part of the world right now? And if you still believe that love can grow in the most unlikely places, then don't go far. The next story I tell will be just for you.